Visiting New York can be intimidating for first-timers, and there's certain unspoken rules and customs that newbies tend to break many times without realizing it. In this video, we'll share all of them and even a few bonuses so your next trip here is free from any embarrassing or possibly expensive mistakes. As a tourist, you are far more likely to get hit by a bike than you are by a car. In my 13 years living in New York, I have never come close to being hit by a car, and 2 or 3 times I almost got hit by a bike. And I wasn't even walking in the bike lane. Always be aware of where the bike lanes are in the city, because the cyclists already have a chip on their shoulder for so many cars and pedestrians ignoring this. If you stand here and try to take a photo or just don't pay attention to it, best case scenario, you're gonna get a warm New York City welcome and learn a few new curse words. Worst case scenario, you are gonna get crashed into, and it is gonna be very painful. And this video is not sponsored by any kind of travel insurance, so you just don't wanna get into that. So sometimes it's a little bit tricky to find, but the easiest way to find the bike lane is to look down like this and you can see it, or better yet, see where all the cyclists are heading. But never ever stand in the middle of this. This drives locals crazier than anything and is one of the main reasons they love to avoid the Times Square area, and that's traffic flow and how to walk properly on a congested city street. Now this actually takes a little bit of effort if, let's say, you have 4 people in your group. What you don't want to do is walk all 4 across, because you are going to be stopping all the people behind you from walking around. You need to be in groups of 2 maximum. And right now, Times Square is not that busy because it's February, but if you're here during a peak period, you will understand exactly what I mean. And this advice goes for all of New York. And what you never ever want to do is stop in the middle of the sidewalk to take a photo or to look for directions. That is the quickest way to get New Yorkers angry at you. And later on in this video, we're going to talk about some similar concepts underground on the subway. I'm going to share a first-hand experience that occurred about a month ago when I went to MJ the Musical, and this is about Broadway etiquette. Now, I was surrounded by many tourists, and halfway through the show, there were about 2 teens sitting next to Adriana and I, and they started to play with their phones in the middle of the show. And let me tell you, when it's super dark in a theater and somebody's looking at their phone, it is completely distracting and disrespectful. And shame on those parents for not realizing what was going on. The big unspoken rule here is do not play with your phone during a Broadway show. And if you're a parent, make sure that your children have the attention span to sit through an entire performance or find out if there's an intermission or not, to avoid situations like that. And if you need even more Broadway tips and tricks, check out the video we shot with a Broadway insider giving you the lowdown. Carmine's Fine Italian Dining, which brings me to tipping, which is something that so many tourists get frustrated with visiting New York. It is such a source of complaint that I've even dedicated an entire video to this foreign American concept of tipping. But the #1 spot I hear about tourists having problems is not even at restaurants, it's at bars, because you are dealing directly with the bartender, and if you do not leave a tip for your drink, you're gonna hear about it. My general rule of thumb is tip $1 per drink, some say $2 per cocktail. The bartender will be much nicer to you as well. A simple rule for restaurants, tip 20% of the pre-tax total on the bill, assuming your service was good enough. You know, look, I understand the frustration out there because in many other countries, servers are paid living wages, but in the United States, they live off of tips. And while I might not personally be a fan of it, I still adhere to it, because when you visit another city, another country, you have to do as the locals do. Something brand new in New York, if you are ordering Uber Eats or DoorDash delivery to your hotel, they have pretty much cut out tipping. This is a recent change where they've just raised fees. Now they have a screen where they only suggest a $1, $2, or $3 tip after the order has been delivered. And I know many New Yorkers now who just don't tip anymore on these apps because the drivers are getting $30 an hour and the fees, well, they've gone up. The weather, every New Yorker's favorite topic. Take it from me as somebody that films outdoors all the time and relies on weather reports daily to know when to film. The weather in New York City is extremely volatile. First of all, Manhattan, you are never far from the water, so you could catch yourself walking on a street that just has a crazy amount of wind, and it'll feel 10 to 15 degrees cooler. So I'd say between November even to April, sometimes even into May, having a light jacket with you, a sweater, always a good idea. Another thing is the rain. I try my hardest not to film when it's raining. Even last week, at the last minute, rain popped up into the forecast, and we had some of it for about 2 to 3 hours, and I was completely unprepared. Having an umbrella with you at all times, never a bad idea. An unspoken rule that every New Yorker knows so well, many times from bad experiences, is never accept anything when you're walking, especially in Midtown Manhattan. This is how the majority of the scams that we've covered on this channel occur. Don't say yes to a monk handing you a bracelet, to somebody handing you a CD, to a pamphlet, to somebody holding a clipboard. Just keep your eyes locked ahead, avert your gaze. That's the best advice I can give anybody in New York. And if you need even more advice on avoiding scams in the city, watch the whole video we have dedicated to it. Supporting local businesses. I know how easy it is when you travel to go to franchises like Dunkin' Donuts behind me to grab a coffee when you're in a rush, rather than going to one of the local street carts and getting a coffee from a vendor that really relies on the income more. Being a New Yorker, and I think visiting New York, is all about supporting small local businesses like that, and I encourage you to go out of your way to do so. And supporting local businesses is definitely something that'll really make your trip to New York a lot more memorable. In some cultures, it's just commonplace for locals to stare at you. Well, in New York, it is the complete opposite. Minding your own business is something that native New Yorkers especially know all about. So if you see somebody acting erratic, doing weird things, don't stare, don't point at them, just don't get involved. Because if you look at somebody, it could be a trigger for a confrontation, or worse, a signal that you even want to fight. So make sure that you do not stare at strangers here, and don't get involved in conflict here unless you absolutely have no other choice. And don't take a picture with a Hulk and expect him to not charge you 20 bucks for it. Don't take an Uber or a taxi when you can take the subway to get there faster. And don't take the subway when it's quicker and easier to walk. This unspoken rule is broken all the time. Now, I would say if you're considering taking an Uber or a taxi between the hours of 7:30 a.m. to 8 p.m., it's almost always faster to take the subway inside of Manhattan, and a lot cheaper. Let me give you a good example. If I'm at Grand Central and I want to get down to Battery Park, you could take the Express 405 and get there in 13 minutes, 5 stops. That same Uber ride is going to take you 25 minutes, probably more with traffic, and cost you $30 to $40 versus the $2.90 you would pay taking the subway. Manhattan is so well connected by subway that this example holds true in almost any way you could think of between Midtown to Lower Manhattan. And when it comes to walking during peak hours when traffic is terrible, don't even think about hailing a taxi. And even sometimes waiting for the subway could be 10 minutes or more. If it's crowded, walking down the steps is all gonna eat up your time. And if you could just walk 15 to 20 minutes, I always advise walking, unless the weather's bad. And since you're gonna be riding the subway underground, there's some unspoken rules we definitely have to go over. Let me repeat this for the 10th time on the channel. You do not need to buy a Metro card anymore. It is now official. Even at JFK Airport, the AirTrain supports OmniPay, which is contactless payment from your phone or even from a card with a chip. Now, my wife's brother was visiting from Mexico recently, and he was asking me all about this, and I said, as long as you have this enabled in any way, shape, or form, a Metro card is completely useless to you right now. All you need to do is tap your phone or tap your card and you're in. Buying a Metro card, I think it's just an extra step right now. Look, you don't need a Metro card. The Metro card machines even tell you don't need a Metro card anymore. Right from the horse's mouth, okay? So when you're going up an escalator in a subway station in the city, always stay to the right, because if people are in a rush, they're late for a meeting, they're late for court, I don't know what, they want this lane here open. Do not stand to the left unless you are walking quickly. Another unspoken rule broken all the time, and it's really just courtesy, is when people are getting out of the subway, do not block the doors. Stand to the side, let them exit, and then go in. And you would be surprised how often I see people breaking this simple rule even locals. The subway intercom is likely gonna sound like a toddler babbling right when you need it most, or the train track noise like this is gonna make it impossible to hear what the next stop is. Always be paying attention to how many stops you have left if you don't know the city well. Even a few weeks ago, I missed my stop because I zoned out. It happens to everybody. Don't rely on the conductor's voice,
34th Street.
unless it's clear like that. If the subway is super crowded during rush hour, one advanced tactic is what I'll call pre-walking, is when your station is approaching, standing up and moving towards the door. Because if you wait till the last second, you could run into a sea of people flooding onto the train right as you want to get out. So if you have the time, get up right as your stop is approaching on a busy, busy train. Respecting neighborhoods, and this goes beyond the obvious, like not littering. I'm also talking about your volume and your noise if you're going out at night and going to bars. Now, I used to live at that apartment right there in Greenwich Village for almost a decade, and I can tell you that on weekends, the volume from outside was enough to wake you up unless you had a fan or white noise going, and people would sometimes even open up our garbage area to use the bathroom. That being said, always paying attention when you're out and not being super noisy on the street late at night is going to be very considerate of you when there's people sleeping who have to go to work the next day. Another unspoken rule is if you are going to celebrity houses or even places where celebrities used to live, like Richard Gere's old townhouse behind me, which sold for over $10 million in 2007. If you're a huge Richard Gere fan, you can take a photo of it, that's fine, but don't peer into the windows, don't open the gate, don't stand on their stoops. Realize that people live here and be respectful of that. Richard Gere lived there, Sandra Bullock, Anne Wintour from Vogue is somewhere here. I lived on the poor side of the street. Let's talk fast serve restaurant etiquette, and I'm actually standing in front of my old deli here in the village. If you go to a deli, a bodega, a pizza spot, and there's a long line, make sure you know your order before you get to the front. Step out of line if you have to, because if you're gonna be asking the worker 50 questions while there's 30 hungry construction workers behind you, you're gonna be in for some trouble. That is one thing, respecting people's time. If it's busy, check the menu first. I'm gonna throw one more bonus tip out there. If you're at a small casual eatery, let's give an example, Shujiao Fuzhou Cuisine in Chinatown. They don't have a ton of tables and they're always super busy. What you don't wanna do is sit there after your meal for 20 minutes just chatting if people are waiting for tables. If you're at a finer dining establishment, take your time. They'll let you know if they need the table. But if you're at a small casual place, see if people are waiting for tables and don't sit there and chat for 30 minutes after. And this is something that goes against a lot of cultures. I know even my wife in Mexico loves to do what's called sobremesa after her meal, sit there and chat. And you can't do it at all New York eateries, especially popular ones where people need the tables. If you're not from the US, especially Latin America or Europe, listen closely. A lot of tourists run into issues with ordering alcohol. Now, one mistake they make is not bringing ID with them if they look anything under 30. I even sometimes get ID'd. If you go to a restaurant and you order a beer, have either your local ID with you or your passport, just in case. And that advice goes for bars and clubs. Almost every bar in the city, IDs, no matter how old you look. Now, something cool about New York versus where I grew up in northern New Jersey is you can buy beer at CVS, you can buy beer at bodegas, you can buy beer at delis. And at a lot of them, you can even buy single beers from a six-pack, which isn't that common everywhere else in the US. Now that you've gotten some of the unspoken rules down, what about saving money? Because visiting New York is expensive enough, and in this video, I share my top 50 free things to do in the city. These will surprise you a lot. Watch this next.